Kevin is the Director of SEO at Shopify. He publishes a weekly newsletter called Growth Memo and is the host of the Tech Bound podcast. Shopify, if you needed to know more about it, is an e-commerce or commerce platform that allows anyone to sell online at a retail location and everywhere in between. Now, I selfishly have a handful of questions that I would like to kickstart this call with. You basically mentioned, yeah, I have that like entrepreneurial mindset, and it's kind of like hustle, hustle, hustle. But I'm going to turn that back on you. You went from an SEO consultant to an account manager to the head of technical SEO, VP of SEO and content, and now you're the director of SEO at Shopify. Did that all pretty much within the span of 5 to 7 years, which is surprisingly fast. So for all of the SEOs out there who are looking to level up their career, what's the secret, Kevin?
What's the secret? I'm very curious to get your take on this as well, Bernard. I think on the one hand, I always like to mention this first. And I think luck always plays a bit of a role. It's, like, I don't know, 30% or 20%, whatever you want to make of this, but you always have to admit that you're lucky and privileged, because it would be a lie to say I planned all of these things and it all comes together as I want. That's not what really happens. But if I reflect back a little bit, there are a couple of factors that definitely benefited me. One is that I just really enjoy this work. And you can maybe tell from my resume, my background, but I just freaking love SEO. I love all this kind of stuff. It's really motivating to me, which means that it's very little energy draining, right? So I can bring a lot of just mental capacity to this whole thing. And that also leads to working a lot, right? I work a lot, and I have always worked a lot. I also had the pleasure of and the luck to have started with great training. So one of my first jobs was at a consultancy that had big enterprise clients and had fantastic smart SEOs who trained me the craft very early on. So I had a really good starting ground. I'm an avid networker. I really like to connect with people and kind of give a bit back to the industry. I think that also helped me quite a bit. And I've been also very open with my ideas and concept and experience. I've been blogging or writing this newsletter weekly for 2 years now, or maybe a bit more. And that helps people to just understand, hey, like, where's Kevin at? Like, what does he know? How much does he know about the craft and SEO and all that kind of stuff? Makes it much easier to then offer a job. And maybe one secret that I can reveal is that I'm an avid note taker. Yeah, what is the secret? Now comes the magic sauce. I'm an avid note taker, and I document everything. And that has helped me to build a body of knowledge over these years that has grown, right? So for example, if I do something at a company, and whether it works out or not, I just write that down somewhere and I learn from it. And I think I have a story that a lot of people don't do that. And that means that you have to relearn things or lessons until they internalize, which means that you learn at least 5 times. If you repeat a mistake for 5 times, that takes a bit longer then to progress. So I've just been very deliberate about how I look at things, what I learn, what my hypotheses are and assumptions. And then maybe lastly, one thing I can offer is that I just learned a lot about working within a company and kind of how to push projects forward and move them along. Part of that is certainly this whole idea of like SEO advocacy, or some people call it SEO evangelism, sharing the narrative, but then also just working directly with the teams, whether it's engineers, designers, writers, and just really try to understand how to I don't say convince them to use SEO, but how to excite them for SEO. So I'll stop there. I feel like a couple of things out there. One semi-secret, and yeah, curious to see how people react to that.
Yeah, no, I feel like, you mentioned, okay, being passionate about what you're doing, and basically that meaning that work doesn't feel like work, right? You maybe stay up late playing when you're doing your technical SEO analyses or coming up with these hypotheses about what's going on with SEO. And you also mentioned, right, being an avid note taker. in which case, what's your preferred tooling for note taking? Some people do like voice memos, some people have crazy notions or roam researches. Where do you jot them down? Like how do you think about that internalization for note taking?
Yeah, it's crazy Notions. I started with Evernote and now I'm a big fan of Notion, and I'm very, very, very deliberate. Some people will probably freak out when they see that, but it's a full library of everything, all sorts of topics that I encounter. So, to just open a little kind of perspective into how my mind works. Basically, whenever I watch a video or whenever I read something, I want to learn something about it. If it doesn't teach me something or inspires me or kind of, if it's not valuable to me, then it's basically wasted time. And sure, I like watch Netflix from time to time. I'm not saying I'm this robot that just learns all day, but when, I'm very deliberate about how I spend my time. And if I spend my time watching a video that I want to learn something from, then I'll take some notes and I'll store a link to that video. And you do that over years. And you have a full body, like I call it my digital brain, right? And so whenever I search something on Notion, it could be anything. It could be, I don't know, log file analysis. It could be entities. It could be squats, right? In the fitness realm, whatever. I have like a list of things that I watched or read or listened to. And I can go back to my cliff notes from that content and look at what I learned about it. And so, yeah, it's just like this constantly growing kind of digital brain. And of course, I've done the same for SEO, which is super helpful. And I groom it and I maintain it. And I have a lot of fun doing that type of stuff. And I think part of that is also that I don't have a great memory. Like it's very selective. And so I just really lean on technology to fill that gap for me.
Yeah, no, totally. And I feel like a lot of those notes are probably then what graduates into these more fully fleshed out blog posts and pieces of content that you publish on your blog. And then those in turn lead to better networking opportunities and people coming out and like asking you for advice, right?
That's exactly right. It kind of reinforces each other. And then, I publish something based on my notes. Some people read it, reach out to me, and they will offer their viewpoints or opinions, or maybe correct something that's wrong. And that then allows me to kind of refine my thinking and kind of question my ideas. And it also sometimes, then allows me to speak at conferences because people say, hey, I read this article about, entities. Why don't you come and talk a little bit about this at the conference? So now I can use the article and my notes as a basis for the deck, but I'm also at a conference where more people come and engage and they're like, what about this? And I'm like, I never thought about this. Or they say, oh no, that is actually not right. And then I can go back and refine my thinking. So there's a little bit of a flywheel effect, if you want to throw a buzzword at it, or some like feedback loop of how to kind of refine your thinking. And, I think that has really benefited me over the years, is that I started out with some assumptions. I was very deliberate and intentional about questioning them. And then over the years, I kind of crowdsourced those assumptions, right? Those hypotheses or axioms, and basically learned from other people and experts about how to really think about it. And I think that's how all of this comes together. And so now I can come to a company and be like, hey, we to like, these are assumptions that I've validated, that I know work, and I know what the impact is. I know, like doing X provides X percent incremental traffic and blah, 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 like all these kind of things. So it's very systematic.
Yeah. Then I guess to sum it all up, right? Say a lot of our audience out there works internally at an SEO, like in an SEO position, and they want to aspire to be where you've been going. I mean, yes, taking a lot of notes and internalizing those are great, but like, how do you just kind of, move up those ranks, right? Like what was it that got you to like hop to technical SEO consultant to now director of SEO at one of the most prestigious online businesses out there?
So we spoke a lot about the knowledge kind of part and like understanding what to do. And then there's also a big how to do it. And, I want to point out that like I'm following the management track. and people really should kind of question if that's the right thing for them to do. I met a lot of people, some people who were in my team who took on management roles and then after 6 months learned that they hated it. So management itself is kind of it's its own kind of way of working. And after a while, you're more and more removed from actually doing the work and more focused on management, right? So that's just like one caveat or kind of advice that I want to throw out there. But working in a company is its own kind of game, if you will, right? And that doesn't mean you should game working in a company or it's bad. It's no judgment in that, but it's its own kind of way of working. And so, I learned a lot over the years about aligning and sharing information, like building out a strategy, pitching that strategy, getting people on the same page, and then also advocating and asking for resources the right way, right? This is one of the biggest challenges when you work at a company is to get the engineering resources or design resources or writing resources. And so, I learned the hard way how to do it wrong, and then I learned how to do it right. And so put all these things together, and that I think allowed me to have a career in-house at startups or at companies, basically. And part of that is also because the awareness for SEO has just simply grown over the years. And I don't think, like, for example, at G2, I was a VP of SEO and content, and I don't think that would have been possible 10 years ago. But today you have companies that drive the majority of traffic and business from SEO. And so I was also in part lucky to ride that wave of a growing awareness and importance of SEO for companies.
Yeah, let's take this to then the next thing, right? I read your blog. I always want to know what's happening in Kevin Indig's brain, because your brain is always, formulating lots of cool things, right? I think that we see SEO heading in a lot of different directions, and some of the common themes that I think you've been bringing up are a few different ideas. Number one is this idea of Google's search engine results page becoming the sort of content result that users want to see. Another common theme that we see emerging with GPT-3 is this prevalence of AI written content that honestly isn't the absolute worst. And the last thing that we're seeing is people's attention span is becoming, less and less. And so you keep talking about the rise of short video and perhaps now the rise of short content from like a Google Stories perspective. Which one of these themes are you like the most bullish on? And are there other things that you've been mulling over about where you see SEO heading?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, I just want to give you a shout out for doing such a good preparation for this conversation. I'm very impressed, and I appreciate you for doing that. So thanks a lot.
Of course.
What I'm most bullish about is actually Google answering. I mean, these trends all go hand in hand together, right? Basically, what this all comes up to or rolls up to is just simply shortening any time for users to have a good experience. That's basically what it is, right? TikTok can understand and profile you faster than anyone else because their machine algorithms are just out of this world. It's actually scary how good their algorithms are and how good they understand you, better than yourself. And it's similar with Google, right? Like Google provides more and more information in the search results under the umbrella of providing a better user experience, which I think is true. And yet at the same time, it comes at the cost of the ecosystem, right? The Google ecosystem consists of Google as a search engine, the users of that search engine, and then also the websites that provide the content and the results for that search engine. And so you see that the third player or the websites and the content providers in that ecosystem, they lose relevance in the ecosystem, and they never really had any power or any say. Right? If you opt out of Google, if you exclude your whole website in robots.txt from being crawled, then just another website will pop up. There's no damage. Maybe there's a handful of sites that could do that and could bring real damage to Google, maybe in Amazon, but this will never happen. So anyway, long story short, I think there's a general trend that we're seeing, and that kind of that those trends are all kind of interconnected. So because we're seeing rising CPCs, for example, cost per click, right? Rising CPMs, like basically advertising is getting more expensive across the board. In most, there are outliers, but in most niches. And at the same time, getting organic traffic is harder and harder. More companies are looking to explore channels like a YouTube or like a TikTok. I mean, TikTok is very tough for corporate. It's like corporations or brands have a hard time there. But they then use influencers as a intermediary. And all of this is connected. And so when you ask me, like, which one are you most bullish about? Of course, as an SEO, I care mostly about how Google kind of skims off the top of clicks and traffic. But I am taking a big step back and I'm seeing that all these trends are kind of interconnected. And a big part of why this is happening is that there is very little ways anymore to capture new attention at a low cost, right? So what I mean by that is right now everybody's flooding TikTok because there's a good arbitrage, right? The ads are still relatively cheap, and so you can acquire a lot of traffic and turn that into business. That's not the case anymore on say Instagram or Facebook or maybe even Google, even though there's a lot of advertising still happening on Google. But they're not these new big consumer platforms that give you this variety of cheap advertising on which you can build a business. That's kind of what this all comes down to. And that's why these trends are very, very interesting. It's simply getting harder and more expensive to acquire new customers as a company. I'm going to stop there because I feel like I did like a whole kind of 360-degree roundhouse through TikTok and the Google SERPs, all that kind of stuff. But I'll see some general patterns across the board.
Yeah, no, I think the observation that you brought up, that is Google trying to minimize the amount of friction that people have with searches, is something that we see happening all the time, right? That's why you see the rich like carousels, right? The related searches, the knowledge graph panels, like Google's, in my opinion, trying to end the search result with one SERP. Right. And that's kind of where you see, like intent pop up, because it's like, oh, for a given topic that somebody's searching for, they could have this range of intent. And then you see Google take like a couple from the subtopic, a few from that subtopic, maybe a video carousel. Right. And so I think that's a very good observation right there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Google, similar to how the TikTok algorithm understands users better and better, Google gets so much better at really understanding what people want at a certain location at a certain time. And even when it comes to a very ambiguous query, something like shoes, right? Something that can have a lot of meanings or user intentions, Google gets so much better at understanding what are all these minor intentions or minor intents, the common intent, right? What are all the different reasons for why people would look at that keyword, and then display a variety of results, right? And so to make all this a bit more tactical and tangible, I think one of the biggest challenges for SEOs is to understand what happens in the search results. I truly mean that. It's not anymore what happens on your website, unless you're this huge mega website, right? Then technical SEO still matters. But for a lot of cases, it's much more important to understand what happens in the search results and how you can be relevant within that search result. We kind of go back to that same situation where how SEO started, right? It's all about relevance, but the meaning of relevance has changed, right? The meaning used to be, are you relevant for a certain keyword? And nowadays is, are you relevant for a certain intent? And that is not as, people often misconstrue that. They say, oh, there's 4 intents, there's transactional, navigational, and informational, and then I've got last one is also kind of navigational, right? And actually what happens is there's probably hundreds or maybe thousands of intents out there, right? It's a very fine-grained idea of like, I want to buy shoes near me. Like that is a certain intent. Or I want to understand what the most trendy shoes are right now in this season. Those are very different types of intents, and you can abstract them to navigational or informational, but you're doing yourself a disservice because you're missing the nuance, right? It's not enough to just say, oh, people just want to learn something here. It's people want to have a tutorial, or people want to be inspired, or people want to get some opinions about something. These are all forms of learning. And we as SEOs need to understand exactly what the intent here is. and then address that intent in the best way. So that's just like an attempt to make all of these kind of trends more tangible. And if you do that right, then you can still play in that ecosystem that is now very focused on like this, as you said, like this one SERP, shorten the user journey as much as possible and give people a valuable result ASAP.
Yeah, I got one last question, and then I'm gonna stop hogging the mic, and Travis will start fielding a lot of these questions that we've gotten, that we're getting. So what's your model for approaching SEO today? I know it's a very complicated question because, are you a B2B SaaS? Are you a directory website? Are you whatever, can you build an SEO growth loop into what you're doing, right? It really just depends on your business model, what you're looking to accomplish. But say you're getting started from scratch, say you were approaching Shopify, right? They're not the brand that they are today. They're a commerce platform trying to get more like rankings. Like what's that approach that you would take to say, okay, how do I get Shopify, starting from nothing to where it's going to be this dominant force in a few years?
The first step is to understand what the levers are for a company, right? So you already mentioned this, there are different types of companies. I typically differentiate between aggregators and integrators. Aggregators aggregate some sort of an inventory. It can be user reviews in the form of G2. It can be actual products like Amazon or any e-commerce store. It can be a marketplace of vendors like a Uber Eats, for example, right? They provide restaurants that send you food. So the aggregators on one side, and then there are integrators on the other side. And integrators, they basically don't have any user generated content or inventory. They have to create all the content themselves. Shopify falls more in the latter camp of an integrator. And so some of our biggest levers are content, of course, and then maybe lead generation tools. And so that's kind of the first step. You have to understand what your levers are that you can pull to then drive growth. Next, once you have that, you have to understand what's kind of to invest in. So I already mentioned content on the integrator side. Of course, there's a whole, like, it's not just enough to write content, but backlinks are important for integrators as well, or just building a brand. So now you want to think about, okay, how can I actually create content that stands out, that gets shared, that gets linked to data stories, content marketing, all these kind of things are important for those kind of companies. And then on the aggregator side, it really comes down to technical SEO and making the product better. A good example would be Zillow, right? They technical SEO, they're fast sites, they have very, very good, thoughtful internal linking. And they understand how to make the product better, right? Like how to provide a map that really shows you the results that you're looking for, the newest listings, the newest real estate that is closest to you, right? These are all product decisions, but they have a vast impact on SEO. And then there are a couple of things that both of these types of companies share, like title optimization, landing pages, the actual content optimization, and some of the more basic SEO type of stuff. So you know your levers, you know kind of what you have to invest in, what the buckets are of SEO that matter most to your company, and then it's really all about being very, very diligent in how you measure success and how you understand your website. So an example for an integrator would be: do you really know how all of your content is performing? Do you have any stale content that needs to be updated or refreshed? Do you have a production line or a production system in place for creating new content? And can you scale that up, right? At the same time, on the aggregator side, do you what's the quality of the pages that are indexed? Is there maybe a page template that doesn't perform well because, I don't know, it has thin content or it has bad results or the user experience is bad, right? So it's a very systematic approach of understanding how your machine works. And then from there, it's all about understanding what intents you can cover and what topics you can cover. And that's universal both for integrators and for aggregators, with the difference that on the integrator side, you create that content yourself. And then on the aggregator side, you really think in terms of page templates that you can create to go after these user intent. So one example would be at G2, right? It's a software review platform or a software marketplace. And then an intent could be to compare two different software solutions. And then you would spot that maybe through keyword research, right? You understand, oh, this is an intent that is true for many different topics or keywords. And then you can say, okay, we're creating a page template that compares maybe two software solutions or 3 or 4 based on what people search for. And then the last step is really to test that in a very systematic or scientific way and then make an informed decision. So it's really this kind of 5-step process that I follow.
Oh, I love it. I love how you split it out into aggregator versus integrator. I think that, yeah, it's a very precise like framework that I think a lot of people probably gloss over, right? They just start like, okay, which keywords have high search volume that my competitors are ranking for, right? It's not this like holistic, let's take a step back. Let's, really think about what we're trying to accomplish here and where our data sources are coming from.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That's it. That hits it on the head.
Yeah, no, awesome. Well, I'll shut up for a sec, Travis. I'll pass the mic over to you to start fielding some Q&A from the audience.
Awesome. Yeah, we've received several questions. One of them is kind of, it's around international and multilingual questions. So we kind of summed it up with this question, but what's your view on serving English language across different locales? Where say there's at least 5% of users visiting from an English-speaking country, for example, visits to the German site from the UK, and how to best deal with potential indexing and duplication issues.
It's a great question. Internationalization is one of these topics where you always have problems, right? Like I can tell you after tens of years of experience that internationalization is always something that's like a little lingering in the back of my mind of like, is there a problem right now? Can I double check this? Because there's always something going on. And so to address the question directly, the key decision maker here is really how differentiated your content is when it is in the same language across different markets. So an example would be the US and Canada. If your content is exactly the same, then you don't need to create a subdomain or subdirectory or cctld for Canada. It doesn't. It's fine. You might have and for SaaS, you might have a different pricing page. You can adjust the information, there accordingly for people visiting from a certain country. So when the content is exactly the same, just stick to one URL or domain version. By the way, I'm going to say that outright. I'm a big advocate of subdirectories for internationalization, but it's a very, very polarizing topic. I'm just going to say that outright. So have one domain for the same language in different markets. If you have, for example, Spanish, and you have different content for Argentina compared to Spain, then a separate subdirectory makes the most sense in my mind, right? But you really want to make the decision based on how different your content is. An example, when I was at Atlassian, we acquired this company Trello for $400 million in cash. And Trello was they had like a team in Brazil, and they got like a lot of traction in Brazil actually. And so even though Trello was localized in Portuguese, we kept a separate subdirectory for Brazil because there was so much unique content that was targeted specifically at Brazil. And that worked really well. So make the decision based on how differentiated your content is in different countries.
Perfect. And then the next question from Roshana, I apologize if I mispronounced your name. But what's the best way to rank one piece in 3 different regions? How important is countrywide search volume?
It's a great question. I would kind of build that on top of the answer that I gave before. If you want to rank in different regions, the first step is to really understand if that's possible. And one of the things that I would simply do is I would look at the results, the top 10 results in all of these 3 regions. And see, is there one site that ranks with the same page in all 3 locales? And if there is, then that's the right kind of gauge for you to say, I can do that too, or we can go after the same thing. And if there's not, then you want to dig into the content and understand if it is very different from region to region. I'm not sure if that is, if I'm not sure if I pull this out of the question, whether the content is in the same language or not. If it's not, then you want to localize and make sure you pay attention to the local SERPs. Are they showing the same types of results? Are they showing blog articles? Or maybe, are they showing blog articles in one locale and landing pages in another locale? It goes back to user intent, and you want to emulate or mimic that user intent. But if it is the same language, then you can really look at the search results to get an answer of whether you need to create 3 pieces of content that are slightly different from each other, or if you can rank with the same piece of content based on what's already happening in those search results.
Excellent, excellent. So Kristen has a question kind of going back to the earlier discussion around SEO career growth. But the question was thoughts on trying to move up the ranks with one focus in SEO versus diversifying into paid and performance marketing to open up opportunities for growth marketing roles.
It's such a good question, because on the one hand, you tend to make the fastest progress in your career when you're specialized, right? Specialists always stand out. There's less competition, you're more visible. And I had the opportunity to specialize in technical SEO very early on. These days though, like even technical SEO might be very broad, and you might even want to become a specialist in something like mobile optimization or internal linking or core web vitals or some of that stuff, right? So that's just an aside. On the other hand, if your goal is to become CMO, VP of growth, VP marketing, those kind of, like top roles, then at some point you need to go from specialization to generalization. And that shift is incredibly difficult because people seek you out for your specialty. But, if you then say, oh, I actually want to move out of that specialization, then, companies are going to be a bit hesitant. So the best way to actually do that is to make that shift within a company, specialize, move up the ranks, get more responsibility, get a larger scope, and then expand your role from there. I hope that makes sense. So I'm happy to elaborate, Kristen. Let me know if that was useful.
Awesome. And then Paul and a couple others are really curious to like, what's the day-to-day at Shopify as director of SEO look like?
Yeah. Day starts with looking at a lot of reports and dashboards. It's really important for me to have a constant pulse on how things are going and how things are moving. And you can't do too much of that. We're just going to be honest, like refreshing analytics or whatever web analytics tool you have 50 times a day is not going to help you make better decisions. But you want to have a pulse on how things are going. That's the first thing. Then there's a lot of meetings, work time or manager time versus maker time. It over indexes on manager time, the higher up the ranks you get. So I'm spending a lot of time in meetings where we align on next steps, check in on something. And then it's really about just, updating your priorities on a regular basis, understanding what has to be done, where problems arise, how to fix those problems. A lot of that is communication on Slack or in meetings. And then there's a whole kind of part of, just taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture. So actually, I started a while ago to block the first couple of hours on my Monday morning to just strategize and just look at the bigger picture. Where are we going? Where are the opportunities? Where are the threats? Where are the problems? What do we need right now? And then jump kind of back into the meeting jungle. So yeah, a lot of meetings, a lot of pulse checking and understanding how things are going, and then a ton of erasing fires and solving problems, really.
Nice. And I think you kind of piqued Morgan's interest from the original question, the first question. But they want to know why subdomain versus cctld.
Yeah, why? First of all, I tested this a lot of times, and every time the subdirectory came out on top. So I'm very bullish on this. I have a strong opinion on this, I've accumulated a lot of other research analysis where subdirectories came out on top as well. The reason, my understanding is that a subdomain, for example, has a different DNS, and for Google, oftentimes means it's kind of a different website. So if we're thinking in terms of authority, however you want to quantify that, right? Like you can say in terms of backlinks or domain pop or domain authority, like however you want to qualify that. But basically, the authority of a domain seems to have a higher carryover effect when you have a subdirectory than a subdomain. Now, that being said, does that mean a subdomain is always bad? No. Like if you want to try out something new, or if you want to separate pieces of a site for whatever reason, that's fine. Two, you sometimes have to work within the constraints of your CMS or whatever platform you're using. Like, for example, at G2, we use HubSpot, or we used HubSpot, and that forces you to use a subdomain. You can reverse proxy it to a subdirectory, but it initially starts on a subdomain. So there are technical limitations as well. And then 3, you got to work with what you have sometimes, right? So if you join a company and they have, say, a blog on the subdomain, and it takes, I don't know, like a huge amount of engineering resources to port that to a subdirectory, and there's this other important thing that these engineers have to do, then you just have to prioritize accordingly, right? So I just want to say there are lots of caveats for why people tend to use a subdomain or maybe even a cctld, but I have made great experiences with subdirectories. I've tested it several times, and from a pure SEO perspective, it always came out on top.
Excellent. And then Alexander is asking, do you have any tips for building meaningful links to product and feature pages?
Yeah, it's difficult. These are typically not the pages that tend to get a lot of links. So you have to find workarounds. One way is to just get links to other pages and then link from those pages to feature and product pages. Works pretty well. That's the whole idea of the topic cluster approach. There are other approaches as well, but that works. That can work. Another hack around is to have some sort of like a versioning on these product feature pages. So you can, for example, at the bottom say, hey, just release a new version of this feature or of this product. These are the latest deployments or the changes we made, something like a change log. That can sometimes have people link to those pages if the change is impactful enough. Or a very kind of hacky approach is to say, okay, I'm going to create a linkable asset, say a data story, and then when it has enough links, I'm just going to throw one redirected to the product feature page or to the product page. Works most of the time. Google is getting better and better to just understand if those links are actually relevant. But if you do it in a smart way, this can still work out. Reality, though, is that it's really hard to get links to feature pages or to product pages, even sometimes to category pages if they're not super sexy. And so the old school approach was to just add like an infographic at the bottom of that, and that doesn't work anymore. And the kind of new school approach is to say, okay, first of all, we're going to make sure that our internal linking is super tight and that we're getting backlinks to topically related articles or data stories or linkable assets, and then link from those to the product pages. And that's typically the approach that I recommend.
Excellent. And then Justin says, thanks for doing this. He's very appreciative. But he said, would you love to hear some about your approach for communicating ROI on SEO efforts, particularly when the true to cause effect of work, especially technical work, is abstracted behind the algorithm?
Yeah, that's like one of the biggest SEO problems nobody talks about, right? I truly believe that SEO is not a knowledge problem anymore. It's not to understand what to do. It's really about how to get it done. And so there are some things where you can quantify the opportunity size easier because it's an impactful lever and you get a quick feedback signal. A title, meta title, is a perfect example of that. You can pretty quickly understand if the change you made is actually impactful or not. Then there are fuzzier things, often in the corner of SEO hygiene, right? Like 404s, for example, right? When I came to Dailymotion, a company I worked for a while ago, it's a YouTube competitor, they had 1 million 404s, right? And it's like, man, there's like all this bloat and waste on this website. As SEOs, we know that we want to reduce that because it quote unquote wastes Google crawl resources or crawl budget. But how do you turn that into an opportunity size? How much traffic do you get by removing those 404s, right? Like it's very, very difficult to quantify that. And the best way to do it is to test into this, to say, hey, listen, we have this strong hypothesis. We have a really strong belief. We want to invest maybe 10% of the engineering resources we need to do some of the work, and then take a step back and measure the results. And that's often how you have to operate. You have to test or commit to trying something out and then make a decision to go all in. Or the other way is you first collect a lot of trust by doing the things that you know for sure work and are easier to quantify. And then you use that trust to take a bet, right? You say first, hey, okay, instead of solving all these 1 million 404s, why don't we just like optimize 1 million titles, see what the results of that is, because I can quantify how much traffic I expect from that. You do that, you get the positive result, you go back to your boss and say, listen, like this worked out. Let's take a bet together on removing those 4 fours and then see what happens. So there are ways to kind of play with trust and leverage to get some of these things done. And the first step is to just have a really good understanding of what you can easier quantify in terms of opportunity size and whatnot.
Excellent. This is kind of the last question. I'll hand it back over to you, Bernard. But Vishal asked, what advice would you give to content writers and creators trying to optimize their content for search? I'd love particular tips around article length, keyword density, anything you can throw at content writers, given your experience.
Heck yeah. Such a good question. I love it because actually the whole game of content creation is so much deeper than people make it out to be. And there's there kind of a couple of trends that I want to give you, Vishal, to like as tips. The first one is expertise, right? Google has for years been moving into the direction of just pushing expertise and elevating expert content as a remedy to a lot of untrustworthy content. So there's a backstory to this. I wrote a lot of that on my blog. I'm happy to send you the article. What you have to know is that expertise matters today. And Google has a lot of ways to understand when an expert creates content versus somebody who doesn't. And I'm not even talking about, like, sure, this whole concept of EAT floats around there. It's very abstract. But even the way you write the content, Google will understand if you mention the relevant entities that are important, right? Clearscope really helps with that. If you kind of package the content in a way that an expert would package it, do you link to studies that are important for certain articles, right? So just understand that generally expertise is important. And one of the best ways, if you're not an expert, to kind of, I don't want to say fake expertise, but to like still bring a certain expertise to the table, is to just lean on other experts. So you see, for example, very successful SEO companies like Bankrate or Healthline, they all belong to the same conglomerate, by the way. So those guys really figure it out, but they all have reviewers of the content, right? So it could be that somebody with a marketing background wrote an article about some disease, but they have a doctor who actually reviews and edits that content. And they will highlight that in the article itself, right? And whether Google really understands that or whether users just have more trust in that content, I don't want to speculate. But let's just, there are different ways to bring expertise to an article. And that is the first super important piece. Second thing is basically the game you want to play is you want to look at the search results. You want to understand what the answer is that people are really looking for, and then think about what the best way is to answer that, right? So that could mean there's just one straight up answer, right? Like, who was the 5th president of the United States? That's like straight shoot. Was, then I forgot who it was. Is that person? You probably have a featured snippet for that, right? You just want to get to the answer straight away. You don't want to explain the whole background of the person and their history and all that kind of stuff. You want to flip the pyramid on its head and just lead with the answer, and then you can flesh out some more context around that keyword and that person, right? Or there might be a more complex question that people have when they search for that keyword, and that's where you can work with structure and a bit of creativity, right? For example, people want a list of options, then you just make it super easy for them, right? You have a table of contents at the top. You clearly indicate what all the options are. Maybe you provide an opinion or a comment on all these options. You just make it easier for them to evaluate. So I think a lot of the fun and excitement when it comes to content that has to perform in search engine comes to bring that user empathy to the table, understand what is a good experience for them, and then translate that to the content and do the best job you can in making it easy for them and making it enjoyable to read that content. Keep in mind what we talked about earlier is like attention span is shortening. People really just want to get to the thing as quickly as possible. They don't want this whole red tail before that they have to bite through. So I threw a couple of like trends and pointers at you. I hope that's useful.
Excellent. Yeah, that's very useful. And Tina has a follow-up question about, can getting quotes from subject matter experts and embedding them in the article help with establishing trust with Google?
It can, if you do it well. and if those are actual subject matter experts. What I see a lot of times is that sites try to rank with roundups for certain keywords, and it can work if there's a low keyword difficulty or low competition for a keyword. But it's much better when you do it like a journalist, like read the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, like insert all these other great publications that have been dominant for maybe 100 years already, right? They do the exact same thing. They tell a story and then they embed really useful quotes or input or statements from people who are either affected or who are subject matter experts. And so the lazy approach is that, oh, I'm just going to like round up 30 quotes. I'm going to send people this Google survey and they're going to fill it in. I'm just going to hit publish. And the smart way to approach this is to really tell your story around some of these statements and opinions that experts have. So it can work, but only if you do it smartly.
Awesome. Thank you.
Dude, awesome stuff. When you were talking about content commodity, right? Like there's certain queries where how many legs does the dog have? It's like, all right, 4. Who's the first president of the United States? George Washington, right? I think that overlaps heavily with AI content, right? AI content, at least in a GPT-3 sense, is basically a highly probabilistic model on ingesting billions of records and having a very high likelihood that certain words should follow certain other words. Yep. And, this is something where we didn't really talk that much about AI content, but what's the role then that you see AI playing a role in content generation moving forward, especially if we're going to see certain sectors really move away from commoditized content towards this unique point of view?
Yeah, I love that you bring us back to that question, Bernard, because it's actually a really important one. And I think I remember you saying in the intro that some of that content actually is getting decent, sometimes even good. And I've noticed the same thing where I actually was maybe even like 1 or 2 years ago, I was not so bullish. I was more bearish on AI content. I was like, who knows if that ever gets good enough. And then I saw some of the things coming out and I was like, ooh, that's actually much better than I expected. And so now I can actually see a path or a world not too far away where very descriptive content is just something you're going to hand over to an AI, to a model that can do it much, much better than you. And so to me, the job of content moves from where you said it correctly. I termed this, or I coined this term, commodity content, which is really content that anybody can create. And too many sites and people are wasting their time going after that type of content. And so you want to move to a direction where it's really hard for a machine to provide good content. One example is opinions or this kind of expertise type of thing, even though like in some cases, machines are actually getting really good at like synthesizing research down to a few insights. And that's all like related to known problems. And so what machines are not so good at is unknown problems and exploring new things, right? So they're very good when you have clear inputs and a clear description of what you need. But when you tell a machine like, hey, there's this new problem that we know very little about, and how could we solve that? That's when a machine is like, I don't know, I have no training data on this. So long story short, like this whole kind of push into expertise and kind of what is something that somebody who has really dealt with a certain topic for many years, what is their viewpoint and what are some of the things that they see coming? That's really in my mind where it would still make sense to have humans provide the content or create the content. But even there, I could see humans in the future just dictating something into their phone, even if they're an expert, and then the AI creates an article out of that. And so it's actually a very exciting time. And it's very difficult to anticipate how that will turn out and what that will mean. But yeah, I think journalism is something that machines still have a hard time emulating. Anything that adds like an unknown kind of factor to the topic. Yeah, but it's actually very exciting. And I could see that, a lot of these boring tasks is something that writers will not have to do anymore in the future.
Dude, I could nerd out with you about this, like hypothetically speaking, for probably a good chunk of time, but we have a lot of other questions. The thing that like gets me, idea of SERP similarity, right? If I'm like gonna nerd out with you for just a second on
Let's
this.
do it. Let's do it.
You can imagine, right? Like there's certain topics that everybody in the world, for the most part, would agree upon, in which case Google would know from its own machine learning that these are highly probable like likelihoods in terms of like content results being displayed. This is definitely falls into facts, history, what is, definition, right? Everybody for the most part can agree that those are what they are. However, there's going to be these newer topics, right? Maybe things around gun laws or abortion, where, right, machine learning is going to look at the corpus of how the internet is writing or describing these things, and it's going to see certain dissimilarity, right? Where it says, wow, you know, like there's no common consensus on, you know, what is good and what is bad, or how people are approaching this. So I feel like we're going to see Google evolve their machine learning algorithm to like understand that when certain topics are being discussed, there's no consensus, in which case unique perspectives with journalistic takes and interesting views are going to dominate that SERP. Whereas, right, for something that's like just so like cut and dry, it's like, okay, everybody agrees on that, then, you know, AI content can totally dominate like that particular sector, right?
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with that take. And you do a great job in making it very specific and tangible. So 100%. Yeah. And you know, it's so interesting because we're currently at a point as a society where we question when we have actually consensus about certain topics and why we're not, right? This idea of truthiness, right? Or like when is something fake news or when is something real? That's been like in the last 5 to 6 years, it's been like a new thing on the horizon. We're like, who actually is an expert, right? Like, do we agree on who an expert actually is? And or do we question that? How much room do we leave for people to just have their own set of facts, right? Like all these, I mean, I have my struggles with that, but you know that's very top of mind. And so this idea of consensus and this idea of agreement is very, very important, very top of mind. And you see that going away a little bit, and that's a problem because that means that Google could get into trouble for showing certain facts. But there was this like this big case, I think it was in 2016, 15, 14. I might butcher the exact year, where Google showed a specific result about the Holocaust that actually denied the Holocaust, right? And that became public in The Guardian, and that was one of the moments where at Google people were freaking out, like, holy crap, like what, excuse my French, what kind of results are we showing and how can we circumvent that? And that's where a lot of this push to expertise kind of came from, is to say, okay, we need fact checking. We need a common understanding of what, you know, when a result is trustworthy and when not. So yeah, absolutely. We will see more of this hard line between fact and non-consensus, and Google will push more in providing maybe a universal set of opinions. And for an AI or for any machine to understand what side a person is taking or what side an opinion is taking, that is actually a very interesting problem. Like, what are the indicators for you to say, oh, that person is taking a stand for abortion, or that person is taking a stand against abortion? And how does that evolve over time is another complex problem. So that is a long-winded way to say, yeah, it is. I totally agree with your take, and it's a very interesting problem to watch.
Totally. Lots more questions have surfaced. So we're gonna do rapid fire because Kevin's probably busy, gotta run. Tina asks, do you have any tips for converting users from the content you have ranking? So it's not just driving traffic, but actually converting.
I love that question because that is so much more important than traffic itself, right? Traffic is just a means to an end, and a lot of people get hung up on traffic. And the answer is, there are some things you can do universally, like a CTA, right? You want to provide a CTA. You can also overdo it with like some annoying exit pop-ups or just like some immediate pop-ups. So the magic and the unlock in conversion optimization is in context. When are people coming the first time to my site? I don't want to show them a pop-up, excuse me, when they come visit the first time, but maybe I should show them a pop-up when they came the 5th time or the 10th time. And can you test that? Or is it an article that's very top of the funnel, very, very introductory to the topic? You probably don't want to push people to sign up too much. versus when it's a high intent topic where you actually want to push people. So long story short is it's all about context when it comes to conversion.
All right, next one. What resources and people do you suggest beginner SEOs to follow? Also, how can one start to try testing hypotheses? Does it always involve building your own site?
It's a great question. You definitely want to follow Bernard and Travis. And you know, I feel like when you enter Twitter SEO, there's just, you know, like you find some of the people who provide some of the most impactful insights over time. So if I were to attempt to provide a list right now, I'd probably forget 10 people and would regret that. So my suggestion is to just start in Twitter SEO and just follow everyone, and then wait 3 months and then look at who actually sticks in your mind and unfollow everybody who didn't provide valuable insights. That's how I would approach it today. And then the other thing is that SEO is a practical discipline. It's not a theoretical discipline. You will gain the most lessons and insights from doing the thing versus reading about the thing, even though reading about the thing can inspire you to do the thing, right? So you want to do both. You want to over-index and lean heavily into application and doing. And if you don't work with a site, then you want to start your own site. It could be a blog. It could be a shop. It could be, you know, something. I started with a blog back in like very first time into SEO. Luckily, the agency I worked at forced me to start a blog. It was great because I was able to test things out. Yeah, just like the very basis of testing is just do something and see what happens. That's the most basic thing. Write it down, document it, and then think about why did it happen. And then just follow that thread. Testing is all about an insane appetite for curiosity, and just keep asking why, and how can I test or try some things out, and what can I learn from them? So don't overthink it in the beginning. Don't try to be super scientific. There is the very scientific way to SEO testing, but just start somewhere and then see where it leads you.
Last one. How much of a lift have you seen using internal link optimization with Tipper or Tipper Lite? Is it worth for other brands, websites, blogs to implement this model? Asks Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends on the site, because the impact scales with the number of pages that you have in the index and the amount of traffic you get. Back at Atlassian, when I first developed it, we achieved 160% incremental uplift over 1 year, over 12 months, right? It was pretty impactful, pretty meaningful for the business. And it will depend. So for a smaller blog, honestly, you won't see that much uplift. If you have, if you have 20, 30 pages, don't bother, honestly. I think it starts getting really interesting when you have a couple hundred pages. That's when you start seeing more effects. And the application of Tipper to integrator sites versus aggregator sites is also slightly different. I wrote about this idea of centralized versus decentralized internal linking on my blog. I'm happy to share the article. Thanks Bernard for sharing that in the chat as well. So you wanna make the decision based on how big your site is and whether you're an integrator or aggregator. Aggregators typically see a bigger impact from Tipper.
Kevin, this is amazing. I love when we get together, get to nerd out about SEO, and have an audience of people that are also nerding out about SEO alongside us. Nothing brings me more joy. Thanks so much for taking the time. Thank you for sharing all your wisdom, all your advice. We really appreciate you being here.
Hey, same here. I love nerding out. I wish we had more time to maybe do this in the future again and just focus on nerding out altogether. So yeah, big thanks to you and Travis and everybody tuning in. It was a pleasure.
Oh, well, we'll definitely do this again. Maybe we'll even get some other big SEO nerds, and then we can do a nerd out roundtable together. How's that sound?
I'm so down. I'm so game, 100%. Tell me when and where.
Okay. All right. Yeah. We'll do it you invite one other SEO nerd. We'll invite one SEO nerd. Feel like a 4-person round SEO nerd table.
Let's do it. It's a deal.
Okay. It's a deal. We'll get it done. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks.
Now, before we wrap this up, don't forget to share, like, and subscribe so you don't miss out on more great content from the industry's best SEOs, content marketers, and content strategists. The Clearscope webinar series happens every week, and helps SEO content creators of all skill levels advance their knowledge. Hope to see you tune in next time.